Amid the ceaseless motion of modern life, perhaps you have grown familiar with a quiet, lingering fatigue in the mind. Thoughts overlap and tangle. Questions not yet fully formed are swept away by noise, by schedules, by nameless anxieties. And then, even as night arrives, the mind never quite allows itself to rest. This video was not created to give you more information. It was created to open a space of stillness. Tonight, you do not need to understand anything more. You only need to listen. Together, we will step away from Earth, not to escape it, but to see ourselves from a distance gentle enough to soften what feels heavy. Beneath the skies of Jupiter, where storms endure for centuries, where oceans may lie hidden beneath vast sheets of frozen silence, humanity's old questions begin to feel lighter, slower, and kinder. Perhaps as one quiet thought once whispered, the universe doesn't owe us meaning. And yet, within that immensity, we still find comfort. That life can emerge in places we never expected, and that the human mind can do the same. Let this voice guide you into a slower rhythm. There is no need to stay alert, no need to search for answers. Just remain here and allow the universe to continue the story for you. Jupiter is not a planet meant to be observed. It is a planet before which one pauses and allows imagination to awaken naturally without force. When humanity first turned its lenses toward the sky and realized that Jupiter was larger than everything familiar, combined a strange feeling, emerged not fear, but a quiet misalignment of perception. Ordinary measures suddenly became insufficient. Earth, with its oceans, continents, storms, and long history, shrank into a very modest unit of reference. Jupiter has no surface to stand on, no ground to hold, no clear boundary between above and below. There are only layers of gas swirling and folding into one another, moving endlessly at speeds that, if placed within human life, would be called chaos. Winds exceeding 400 miles per hour, storms so vast they could swallow Earth whole without ever noticing its presence. And yet, strangely, Jupiter does not feel chaotic. It feels stable. The Great Red Spot. A storm that has endured for more than 3 centuries is not an accident. It is a rhythm. A motion repeated long enough to become structure. Jupiter teaches us something quietly unsettling. Not everything that is violent is unstable. Some forms of order appear only when scale is vast enough, when time is long enough, when humanity is no longer the center of measurement. In modern life, we are often caught inside our own small storms, rapidly shifting emotions, overlapping thoughts, reactions, feeding into reactions. We call this a loss of control. But Jupiter is different. Its storms do not seek an ending. They persist. They sustain themselves with energy drawn from deep within the planet, independent of the sun, requiring no external stimulus. Here, Jupiter begins to whisper a profound idea. there are systems that do not need constant attention in order to exist. For much of our lives, we behave as if the mind must always be illuminated, always responded to, always activated. Jupiter operates in the opposite way. It generates its own heat. It moves by itself. It maintains its structure in the quiet of space. Perhaps this is why scientists have begun to suspect that Jupiter is not merely a large planet. It may be an original blueprint, a primordial template for how planets form, arrange matter, and sustain existence over long spans of time. It is no accident that Jupiter appeared early in the history of the solar system. No accident that it influences the orbits of other planets. And no accident that it resembles an unfinished experiment, heavy, deep, and never truly stable by human definitions. Philosophy has returned to this sensation many times. Marcus Aurelius, in Meditations, wrote a sentence brief yet spacious enough to hold Jupiter within it. Look round at the courses of the stars, as if thou wert going along with them, not to search for meaning, but to place oneself within a movement larger than oneself. Seen this way, Jupiter ceases to be a scientific object. It becomes a mirror, a reminder that life and the mind does not have to be small, tidy, clear, or easily understood. Some structures are born to outlast our ability to explain them. And tonight, as you listen to these words, Jupiter asks nothing of you. It does not require you to remember data or visualize layers of gas or wind speeds. It offers only a gentle sensation that you do not need to make yourself smaller in order to be at peace. Like Jupiter, your mind can be vast. It can be complex. It can hold storms and remain stable. If you allow it to move according to its own rhythm, without pressure, without correction, without interference. And perhaps right now, as thought slow as the image of a distant giant planet turning far away begins to fade, you can let yourself drift into a state very much like Jupiter's. No conclusions, no destination, only a steady motion deep and safe enough for you to rest within it. After standing before Jupiter as one would, before an entity vast enough to bend every familiar measure, a very natural impulse begins to arise within us, the desire to know what lies hidden inside it. The feeling is no longer one of pure awe, but of a slow, deep, and enduring curiosity, the kind of curiosity that appears only when we are calm enough not to rush toward answers. It is precisely in that moment that the Galileo mission enters the story. Not loudly, not with the posture of a conquest, just a small object quietly slipping into the orbit of a giant planet, carrying with it a profoundly human longing to see more closely. Galileo did not arrive to confirm what we already believed. It arrived to unsettle those beliefs. Before that, Jupiter was often imagined as a leftover excess material remaining after the sun formed a massive body of gas that never quite became a star. It was a neat explanation, easy to accept, easy to fall asleep beside. But Galileo did not carry comfort with it. It carried data, and data rarely concern themselves with the emotional safety of old assumptions. With each flyby, with each faint signal sent back to Earth, Jupiter began to reveal itself not as a uniform mass of gas, but as a complex, layered structure. On the outside, restless atmospheric bands in constant motion. Deeper within regions of crushing pressure, where matter no longer obeys familiar states. And deeper still, a core that is unclear, not solid in the usual sense, yet not entirely liquid either. A liminal region ambiguous, resembling the boundary between thought and emotion in the human mind. Here, science begins to touch a quiet paradox. The deeper we go, the more our categories dissolve. Jupiter does not allow us to call it gas, nor does it allow us to call it solid. It exists in a state of both, and neither a condition philosophy has long been familiar with. But one science is only beginning to learn how to accept. In our inner lives, we often search for such clear labels as well. We want to know whether we are okay or not okay, whether a thought is rational or misguided. But Jupiter, through Galileo, reminds us that some systems are not designed to be simplified. When Galileo measured Jupiter's unusually strong magnetic field, when it detected asymmetries in mass distribution, a new question emerged, quiet yet impossible to ignore. If Jupiter does not resemble the Sun in composition, if it contains more heavy elements than expected, then did it truly form at the same time, in the same way, in the same place? That question did not dismantle a theory. It opened a space where multiple possibilities could coexist. Philosophy had always been waiting here. In Meditations, Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Everything is interwoven and the web is holy." Not everything has a simple origin. Not every structure can be traced back to a single starting point. Jupiter, as revealed by Galileo, becomes a living illustration of this truth. A planet that may have migrated, may have collided, may have accumulated matter in ways that do not align with the tidy models we prefer. And within that uncertainty, nothing is wrong. Only that reality is broader than our expectations. Galileo did not conclude. It ended its mission by falling into Jupiter like a silent period at the end of a sentence. But what it left behind was not an answer, but a subtle shift in how humans ask questions. No longer, what is Jupiter? But rather, why did we ever think it was simple? The stillness between those two questions matters, much like the stillness you are resting in now. As thoughts slow, as the urge to immediately classify everything fades, we begin to allow complex structures to exist exactly as they are. The mind, like Jupiter, does not need to be clear to be valuable. It does not need a solid core to be considered stable. And if you listen closely, there is something deeply gentle in the way Galileo worked. It did not force Jupiter to speak. It simply listened. It passed by, recorded, and withdrew. No possession, no control, no demand. Perhaps that is also the kindest way to meet ourselves at night, not dissecting, not fixing, just observing long enough for what needs to appear to emerge on its own. Jupiter, through Galileo, does not teach us another fact. It teaches us an attitude. And as that attitude settles in the mind, as the need to understand immediately dissolves, you may allow yourself to drift into a state very much like the planet's deep interior, indistinct, warm, and safe enough that no further answers are required before sleep arrives. After Galileo had gently unsettled humanity's first assumptions about Jupiter, another event arrived, not as a question, but as a direct touch of reality itself. No one planned for it. No one controlled it. And precisely because of that, it carried a particular weight. Comet Shoemaker. Levy 9 did not arrive as a message. It arrived as a pure event. In 1994, for the first time in modern history, humanity witnessed a planetary collision unfolding before its eyes. Not in simulation, not in hypothesis, but as a chain of real comet fragments falling for real, striking for real into a real planet, Jupiter. What was strange is this: the moment did not provoke panic. It produced silence. Because when an event large enough occurs, the human mind often does not react immediately. It pauses, it watches, and in that pause, old layers of understanding begin to crack. Shoemaker Levy 9 did not merely carve dark scars into Jupiter's gaseous surface. It sent shockwaves deep into the planet's interior, much like the way a sudden shock in life can expose emotional layers we never knew we were carrying. When scientists analyzed those waves, something unexpected emerged. The amount of water released was far greater than predicted. Jupiter, long regarded as dry gaseous, an unfinished remnant of the Sun, suddenly appeared as a reservoir holding moist traces of the universe's history. Here, science stepped into a sensitive territory, a place where data no longer supported familiar stories. Theories of Jupiter's formation, once neat, once reasonable, began to wobble. If Jupiter contained that much water, it could not be merely a byproduct of the Sun. It must have traveled through colder regions. It must have accumulated material in more complex ways. It must have carried a longer history than we had previously allowed it to have. But what mattered most was not the water itself. It was how humans responded to being wrong. In our inner lives, we often fear collisions. We avoid them. We try to soften them. We call them crises, breakdowns, mistakes. But Jupiter did not avoid Shoemaker Levy 9. It received the impact, absorbed its energy, and continued to rotate. There was no retaliation, no resistance, only transformation. The scars on Jupiter faded with time, but what they left behind in scientific thought did not. They forced humanity to accept that some truths reveal themselves only when a structure is shaken. The human mind is no different. Some of our deepest parts emerge only after a collision, a loss, a rupture, an unwanted change. Before that, they lie dormant, hidden beneath assumptions about ourselves that we never thought to question. Shoemaker Levy 9 did not destroy Jupiter. It revealed Jupiter. And this is very different from how we usually think about change. We imagine change as loss. But often change is simply the removal of a covering, exposing a structure that is broader, richer in history, and more complex. When old theories collapse, science does not end. It exhales. It expands. It allows multiple scenarios to coexist. Jupiter may have migrated. It may have collided many times. It may have carried water from distant regions of the young planetary system. There is no longer a single story, only a web of possibilities. And within that web, humility arises, not as a moral lesson, but as a natural state that appears when we realize we no longer stand at the center of every interpretation. If you are listening this far, perhaps you too have experienced your own collisions, moments that shook how you understood yourself, others, the world. And perhaps, like Jupiter, you kept turning, not because you were unaffected, but because you were capable of absorbing and transforming more than you imagined. At night, when all movement slows, when there is no need to patch things up or explain them, you may allow those collisions to settle. No labels, no judgment, just letting them exist as part of the history within you. Shoemaker Levy passed through Jupiter, left its marks, and disappeared. Yet because of it, humanity learned something quiet and enduring. Sometimes, only when a system is struck deeply do we truly see its depth. And as that thought softens, as the image of a vast planet absorbing a distant cosmic impact fades, you may let your mind slow its drift, resting safely in the understanding that not every disturbance is destruction. Some of them are simply the way reality whispers that there's more depth waiting to be revealed very gently, very slowly, and calm enough for you to enter sleep. After the impact that unsettled every familiar hypothesis, a new question slowly began to surface, not urgently, not loudly, but like a thin veil of mist settling over all prior understanding. Did Jupiter truly form alongside the Sun? The question was not confrontational. It was expansive, making room for other possibilities to breathe. As finer measurements were taken, as decades of data were patiently rearranged, one small detail grew increasingly difficult to ignore. Jupiter contains more heavy elements than the Sun. Not only hydrogen and helium, but traces of matter that once existed in colder, more distant, slower regions of the protoplanetary disk. That detail is like a subtle fold in a vast fabric. At first, it seems insignificant, but when you touch it, you realize such a fold could not exist unless the fabric had once been bent, moved, placed into a different context. Jupiter. It turns out may not have remained still from the beginning. From here, the idea of a displaced planet emerges not as an error, but as a journey. Jupiter may have formed farther out, where ice and heavier compounds could accumulate more easily. And then, over time, under the influence of gravity and complex interactions, it migrated inward to its present position, carrying with it the memory of distant regions it once passed through. In the universe, migration is not unusual. In the inner life, this is even more true. We often tell our own stories as if everything must have a clear origin, a fixed point of beginning. We want to know where we belong. We want to believe we were born in one place, grew along a straight path, and exist within a stable structure. But Jupiter, with its ambiguous history, suggests another possibility that some forms of existence are shaped by movement, not by origin. Philosophy recognized this gentle unease long ago. Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, "One must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star." Jupiter carries such a form of chaos, not chaos as destruction, but as a misalignment between where it stands and where it was born. And it is precisely this displacement that gives rise to its immense influence within the solar system. It protects, it shapes, it bends the orbits of other bodies, as though its very lack of fixed origin allows it to become a pillar. At night, as you listen to these words, you may have asked yourself similar questions. Am I in the right place? Are the parts of me that don't quite fit signs of failure? Or are they simply evidence of a longer, more complex journey than the one you were taught to expect? Jupiter does not try to return to where it began. It does not attempt to correct its history. It continues to exist to exert influence, to hold its role as a giant planet, despite the fact that its origin is no longer as clear as we once hoped. Here, there is a very quiet kind of healing, not through advice, but through permission. Permission for our stories not to align perfectly. Permission for the heavy parts within us, memories, experiences, wounds to exist without immediate explanation. When science accepts the possibility of Jupiter's migration, it does not grow weaker. It becomes more humble. And within that humility, it opens new models, new paths of understanding, new ways of telling the universe's story, without forcing everything into a single frame. Much like the human mind at nightfall, when we stop trying to define who we are, where we belong, what we must become, a wide space begins to appear. That space is not empty. It simply demands less. Jupiter, the displaced planet, does not lose its place because it once existed elsewhere. On the contrary, because it traveled through distant regions, it carries more layers of history, more matter, more possibility within it. And as this thought settles, as the need to label deviation fades, you may allow your mind to slow its drift like a planet that does not need to reverse time to be accepted. That does not need to return to its point of origin to find peace. Perhaps in this moment, peace does not lie in knowing where you came from. It lies in allowing yourself to be here, carrying everything you have passed through, and continuing to exist quietly, deeply, and safely enough for sleep to arrive. After accepting that Jupiter may be a displaced planet, one not fully born from the same story as the Sun, another layer of understanding quietly comes into view. Subtle yet profound. Jupiter's weather does not belong to the Sun. It does not live by borrowed light. It runs on itself. On Earth, we are accustomed to seeing the sky as a mirror of the Sun. Winds arise from temperature differences caused by sunlight. Storms form because oceans are unevenly warmed. Every movement of the atmosphere is tied to an external source of energy. Jupiter is different. It receives very little from the Sun, far too little to explain what unfolds across its vast face. Most of Jupiter's energy comes from within. Heat trapped since its earliest formation has not yet fully escaped. The planet is still contracting, very slowly, releasing energy like a long breath stretched across billions of years. Jupiter's weather, then, is not a reaction. It is an expression. Within that expression, the great red spot stands out unmistakably. A storm that has endured for more than 3 centuries. It does not require external fuel. It does not need renewal. It persists as if endurance itself were its nature. This contrasts sharply with how we usually think about storms, both in the sky and within the mind. We tend to believe storms must pass quickly. That intense emotion signals instability. That duration implies malfunction. Once again, Jupiter shifts the frame. There are storms that do not need to dissipate for the system to remain stable. The Great Red Spot does not exist despite Jupiter functioning well. It exists because Jupiter functions well. Smaller storms form around it. They collide. They are absorbed, and interaction scientists vividly call storms eating storms. Energy is not discarded. It is redistributed. What is weaker does not vanish uselessly. It becomes part of a larger structure. Here, Jupiter begins to whisper a gentle lesson. Not every conflict must be resolved through elimination. Some only need to be allowed to merge into a greater rhythm. Such a mechanism would not be possible if Jupiter did not rotate so rapidly. A day on Jupiter lasts less than 10 hours. That speed creates parallel atmospheric bands, stable currents, structures strong enough to sustain storms over long periods without tearing the system apart. In the inner life rhythm matters just as much. When we force the mind to move at the pace of the external world, fast, compressed, endlessly, reactive, every strong emotion becomes a threat. But when there is an inner rotation, a stable axis within intense movements can exist without breaking us. Heraclitus, the philosopher of flux, once wrote, "No man ever steps in the same river twice." Yet, he also understood that the river remains a river, that changing water does not erase its form. Jupiter is such a river, but on a planetary scale. It changes continuously without losing its structure. At night, as you listen to these words, you may be carrying storms of your own emotions that linger longer than you wish. Thoughts that circle and refuse to dissolve. We often call this exhaustion, but Jupiter invites a gentler question. Are those storms being held within a system wide enough not to extinguish them, only to contain them? Here lies the healing. Jupiter does not try to control each storm. It does not adjust its weather to achieve calm. Its calm comes from its capacity to hold movement. And as science observes this, it too learns to shift its stance, no longer seeing weather as disturbance, but as language. A way this planet says it is still alive, still transforming, still warming itself in the darkness of space. Marcus Aurelius once reflected in Meditations, "The universe is change. Our life is what our thoughts make it." Perhaps Jupiter adds another layer. Change does not always need to be quieted. Some changes only need to be understood in the right rhythm. As this thought settles, as the image of a giant planet generating its own weather drifts slowly through the mind, you may allow the movements within you to exist without intervention, without naming, without fixing. Simply knowing this, there are systems deep enough to hold storms. And if you are already moving within such a rhythm, even without realizing it, then right now, you may let yourself drift towards sleep, safe in the steady motion of your own being, as Jupiter turns through the cosmic night, needing no light, no explanation, only to continue existing. After listening to Jupiter's rotation and its self-generated storms, we begin to sense another movement deeper still, a movement invisible to the eye, yet powerful enough to hold the entire planet within it. This is Jupiter's magnetic field, not loud, not showy, yet so vast that if it could be seen with the naked eye, it would appear larger than the moon in Earth's sky. That magnetic field does not arise from the surface. It is born in unreachable depths where pressure compresses hydrogen into something strange, something rare. Liquid metallic hydrogen. There, hydrogen is no longer a gas. It conducts electricity. It flows. It rotates with the planet. And from that quiet motion emerges an invisible shield, wrapping Jupiter like a steady breath sustained across billions of years. We are often drawn to what is dramatic, great storms, red scars, visible bands in motion. But Jupiter reminds us that true strength rarely resides where it is most visible. It lives deep below. It endures. And it works without asking to be seen. Without this magnetic field, the solar wind would have eroded Jupiter long ago. High-energy particles would have stripped away its atmosphere, unraveling the delicate structure of its gases. But the magnetic field has stood there silently, bending those streams of particles, redirecting them, protecting what lies within. In our inner lives, we face our own versions of solar wind, pressure, expectation noise, relentless comparison. We often believe we must become harder, faster to react better, armored. Jupiter offers another possibility. Protection does not have to come from the surface. It can arise from depth, from a stable core, electrically attuned to the rhythm of one's own life. When energetic particles strike Jupiter's magnetic field, they do not disappear. They are guided toward the poles where the sky ignites with Jovian auroras more luminous than anything we see on Earth. Bands of green, violet, and rose spiral around the planet's poles as though Jupiter were dreaming in the dark. There is something deeply gentle in this, because it shows us that conflicting energy does not need to be blocked. It can be transformed into light, into beauty, into expression without harm. On Earth, auroras also appear when our planet's magnetic field meets the solar wind. This connection is not merely scientific. It is a quiet reminder at any scale systems with sufficient depth learn how to speak with chaos, not through confrontation, but through redirection. Philosophy has touched this idea many times. In The Gay Science, Friedrich Nietzsche wrote, "One must learn to love, not to love only what is pleasant, but to love the incoming energy itself, to be calm enough not to be carried away by it." Jupiter loves those streams of particles by allowing them to pass yet on its own terms. Tonight, as you listen to these words, you may also be sensing invisible currents, unsettled thoughts, emotions not yet dissolved, memories flaring briefly before dimming. We often try to extinguish them. Jupiter does not extinguish. It orients. The liquid metallic hydrogen at Jupiter's core has never been directly observed, yet no one doubts its existence because what it creates is undeniable. In the same way, the deepest parts of you, your quiet values, your unspoken beliefs, your personal rhythms do not need to be displayed to be effective. They need only to exist to conduct and to turn steadily. Heraclitus once said briefly, like flowing water, hidden harmony is better than visible. Jupiter stands as living proof of this. Its harmony is not found in a calm surface, but in a vast magnetic field that embraces the planet-shaping order from chaotic streams. When science understands this, it learns more than a physical mechanism. It learns a way of seeing, to look toward what is not obvious, to respect silent structures, and to accept that not all strength must be performed. And when that way of seeing touches inner life, it becomes a very gentle form of healing. No need to change circumstances. No need to solve every problem. Only to build a core deep enough that what arrives does not shatter us. If you allow yourself to settle a little further now, imagining a giant planet turning in darkness, wrapped in an invisible shield glowing softly at its poles, you may feel a primal sense of safety, not because there is no wind, but because there is a field wide enough that wind is no longer a threat. And within that feeling, you can let your mind slow its motion. No need to defend, no need to control, just turning steadily, deeply, quietly, like Jupiter in the cosmic night, and allowing sleep to arrive naturally, supported by invisible forces you do not need to see in order to trust that they are there. After sensing the invisible shield that surrounds Jupiter, a very natural thought arises: if a planet can hold so many layers of depth within itself, then what of the bodies moving around it? And then, as our gaze slowly drifts away from that immense surface, we begin to notice something gentle yet weighty. Jupiter's moons are not dead. They are not silent rocks bound to their paths. They are breathing worlds. The 4 Galilean moons, Io, Europa, Ganymede, Callisto, are often spoken of as a group. But when we look long enough, slowly enough, we realize that each moon is its own story, its own rhythm, its own way of being. Like 4 very different regions of the human mind, all circling a common center of gravity, yet never dissolving into one another. Io is the moon of relentless motion. Volcanoes erupt continuously. Its surface reshapes itself within years. There is no long rest there. Everything is always becoming. Io recalls the raw energy within us, the intense emotions, the unformed impulses, the moments when we feel we are too much. Yet, Io is not chaotic. It is simply living the rhythm it was given. Europa is different. Beneath its cold shell of ice, a deep and dark ocean may exist. Nothing exposed, nothing declared, just the quiet preservation of life's possibility. Europa resembles the most protected part of the mind, the place where tender feelings and fragile hopes are kept beneath layers of care. Not to hide them, but to wait for the right time. Ganymede carries yet another rhythm. It has its own magnetic field, a moon large enough to generate its own protective space. Here, we encounter an image of maturity, a part of us that does not merely react to the world, but begins to form its own structures to engage with it, not separating from the center, only becoming stable enough not to dissolve into it. And then there is Callisto, ancient, scarred, nearly unchanged for billions of years. Not because it is lifeless, but because it carries the memory of time itself. Callisto resembles the part of us that has learned acceptance, where wounds no longer need to be healed, only acknowledged as having once existed. 4 moons, 4 ways of being, none of them wrong, none required to become another. Seen together, Jupiter no longer appears as a solitary planet. It becomes a miniature planetary system where each world keeps its own rhythm, yet remains connected by a shared gravitational bond. This differs deeply from how we often imagine order. We tend to think order means oneness, but Jupiter and its moons whisper something else. Order can arise from diversity when it is properly held. In inner life, we often try to quiet every part of ourselves at once. We want raw energy to soften deep emotion, to open old memory to close. But the Galilean system does not function that way. Each moon is allowed to be itself as long as it maintains its orbit, its relationship to the center, without losing its own identity. Carl Jung once wrote a sentence brief, yet deep enough for this moment: who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes. In looking at Jupiter's moons, we are not only looking outward, we are learning how to look inward and to recognize that the mind, too, is a planetary system. There are fiery regions, icy regions, protective regions, regions marked by time. And all of them are turning quietly around a center we do not need to name. Healing does not come from making all moons the same. It comes from allowing each part enough space to exist far enough, not to collide close enough, not to be lost. Jupiter does not control its moons. It simply holds the orbit. And that orbit is stable enough for life of many kinds to be imagined. As this thought passes slowly, gently through the mind, you may allow yourself to rest in the understanding that you do not need to gather every part of yourself into a single story before sleep. You only need to let them turn in their proper rhythms. Io may continue to erupt. Europa may continue to keep its secrets. Ganymede may continue to protect. Callisto may continue to remember. And you, at the center of this system, need not do anything more. Simply exist like Jupiter in the night, steady enough for the worlds within you to be allowed to live. As the current slows, as the image of moons quietly circling a giant planet begins to fade, you may let your eyelids grow heavy, not because everything has been resolved, but because nothing needs to be removed. Within that quiet order, sleep can arrive not as an escape, but as a gentle agreement among all the worlds coexisting within you. After witnessing the quiet diversity of Jupiter's moons, our gaze comes to rest on a world that is anything but quiet Io. If Europa whispers, if Ganymede protects, if Callisto remembers, then Io speaks in fire. Yet, not the fire of meaningless destruction. This is the fire of continuous motion of energy, compressed and compelled to find a way out. Io is the most volcanically active body in the entire solar system, not because it is close to the sun, not because it is warmed by light, but because it is stretched. Jupiter's immense gravity, together with subtle resonances from Europa and Ganymede, constantly distorts Io's shape. This small world is never allowed to rest. It is pulled, compressed, bent, and from that heat is born. That heat does not come from outside. It comes from pressure. In human life, we often look for the causes of eruptions in obvious forces, circumstances, other people, events. But Io suggests something else. Some eruptions do not occur because the light is too strong, but because the tension lasts too long. When a system is held in continuous strain, energy accumulates, and sooner or later, it finds a way to escape. Io's surface changes within just a few years. New lava flows cover old regions. Volcanoes taller than anything on Earth rise and collapse. There is no notion of long-term stability in the familiar sense. And yet, strangely, Io does not fall apart. It is not torn asunder. It continues to exist in a state of perpetual becoming. This is easy to misunderstand. We often associate intensity with danger. We fear emotions that are too strong, thoughts that burn, too hot phases of rapid transformation. We want to calm everything down, but Io does not seek calm. It releases. Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote in "Thus Spoke Zarathustra," "You must be ready to burn yourself in your own flame. How could you rise anew if you have not first become ashes?" Io does not know rebirth as a metaphor, but it lives fully within a very real cycle: accumulation, eruption, transformation. And it is precisely this cycle that keeps it from freezing, from going numb, from becoming a silent, inert rock. At night, as you listen to these words, you may be carrying a form of heat like this within you. Not loud anger, but a low, persistent tension. Things left unsaid. Decisions not yet made. Parts of you held tightly by invisible gravitational forces. Responsibility, expectation, roles. We often blame ourselves for being too much. But Io does not blame itself. It does not see its intensity as a flaw. It sees it as a natural consequence of the position it occupies. Io did not choose to be close to Jupiter, but once there, it learned how to exist. There is a very quiet kind of healing in that way of existing, not by denying the heat, but by allowing it to pass through the surface, rather than compressing until it fractures the deeper structure. Carl Jung once wrote in Psychology and Alchemy, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." Io has no consciousness. Yet, it carries a lesson about consciousness that transformation is always accompanied by heat, by pressure, by changes in form. And if there is no space for release, energy turns inward, cracking deeper layers instead. When science observes Io, it does not try to calm the moon. It learns to understand its rhythm, to see that gravity, the force that holds Io in orbit, is the very force that creates its fire. That attachment and tension often arrive together, and that not every hell is a place to be avoided. Some hells are simply places where change is happening too fast to be called peaceful. If you allow yourself to see Io in this way, it ceases to be a frightening spectacle. It becomes an honest image of those periods in life when everything changes faster than the mind can follow. When we feel we are no longer ourselves. When the surface is constantly being rewritten. Io whispers this, that does not mean you are losing your essence. It may simply mean you are in a cycle of restructuring. And when night comes, when you no longer need to process or understand everything that is happening, you can let the image of a fiery moon slow its rotation in your mind. Not to stimulate, but to remind you that energy, when allowed to move, will find a new form on its own. You do not need to cool yourself right now. You do not need to resolve every pressure. Just know that, like Io, you can continue to exist even while the surface is changing. And within that permission, as heat is no longer compressed, as movement is no longer resisted, the mind can gradually settle. Not because the fire has gone out, but because it has been allowed to follow its proper path. In Jupiter's steady rotation, Io continues to erupt, and you, supported by that same cosmic rhythm, may allow yourself to drift into sleep safe in the understanding that even the most intense worlds have their place within the vast order of the night. After the unceasing fire of Io, the current of the story naturally softens. As if after witnessing eruption, the mind needs a place to sink into depth. And it is precisely then that Ganymede and Callisto come into view, not loudly, not brilliantly, but carrying a very different kind of depth. Oceans in darkness. If Io is the expression of energy, stretched until it must erupt, then Ganymede and Callisto are evidence of another mode of existence. Energy held inward, quietly, patiently, with no urgency to appear. Ganymede is the largest moon in the solar system. So large that if it did not orbit Jupiter, it might be called a planet in its own right. Yet, what makes Ganymede remarkable is not size alone. It possesses its own magnetic field, an exceedingly rare trait for a moon, as though it has developed an inner axis, an ability to protect and organize itself, not wholly dependent on its parent planet. Beneath that seemingly cold surface, science has begun to uncover signs that are difficult to ignore. Subsurface oceans deep below layers of rock and ice, unseen, unreflective of light, yet marked by enough evidence to believe that water and perhaps complex chemical motion has existed there for a very long time, steadily, enduringly. In human life, we often confuse silence with emptiness. But Ganymede reminds us that life does not need to reveal itself in order to exist. Some systems function best when they are covered, when they are not constantly observed, when they are not required to prove anything to the outside world. Callisto moves even further into that quiet. It is one of the oldest celestial bodies still remaining almost intact. Its surface is scarred with impacts like a diary that has never been erased. Yet, unlike many planets or moons, Callisto never fully differentiated. It did not separate cleanly into core, mantle, and crust. It retained its primordial mixture as if time passed through it, but never forced it to mature in the way we often expect. This is strange by familiar standards. We tend to believe that development means clear division right, and wrong, inside and outside, strong and weak. But Callisto exists as a different kind of whisper. Not all evolution needs to complete itself according to a prescribed pattern. Carl Jung once wrote in The Undiscovered Self, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." Callisto seems to have done this long ago. It does not reorganize itself to become optimal. It keeps its mixture, its overlapping layers, its record of impacts, and still it exists. Still, it remains stable. Still, it is an indispensable part of the Jovian system. Placed side by side, Ganymede and Callisto form a rare pair. One possesses a magnetic field protective structure, the ability to generate its own safe space. The other is almost surrendered, undifferentiated, without shielding, openly carrying its history. Yet, both show signs of deep water, of silent motion, of the capacity to sustain an inner world without light. Within the human mind, we carry both tendencies as well. There are parts that have learned to protect themselves, to create boundaries, magnetic fields, safe distances. And there are parts that are ancient primal, never reorganized, still bearing the marks of old collisions. We often try to fix the latter, but Jupiter and its moons do not fix Callisto. They simply hold it in orbit. Heraclitus once said, "The hidden harmony is better than the visible." Ganymede and Callisto are harmonies of that kind. They do not require an active surface, no volcanoes, no light, only stability sustained long enough for oceans not to freeze completely. As the story reaches this point, the rhythm of telling naturally slows. No more eruptions, no more collisions. Only the idea that life and healing as well does not always reside where we can see it. Sometimes it lies deep beneath the rock of habit, beneath the ice of silence, waiting not to be exposed, but simply to be acknowledged. If you are listening in the night, you may be carrying such hidden oceans within yourself. Thoughts left unspoken, feelings that do not require explanation, parts of you that are not clearly classified yet still exist, still move very slowly. You do not need to stir them now. You do not need to illuminate every depth. Ganymede and Callisto do not ask for that. They simply turn in gentle darkness, held by Jupiter's sufficiently steady gravity. And so can you. You do not need to make everything visible in order to be at peace. As this thought settles, as the image of deep oceans moving slowly beneath ancient rock begins to fade, you may allow your mind to sink with it, not into a frightening darkness, but into a safe depth where everything is permitted to exist without proof. In that depth, sleep is no longer a retreat. It becomes a quiet return to the most silent parts of you, still living, still waiting, and never as lifeless as we once imagined. After passing through the hidden oceans of Ganymede and Callisto, the current of thought naturally carries us elsewhere, to Europa. If the earlier moons taught us about enduring silence, Europa whispers something different. Hope does not need light in order to exist. Seen from afar, Europa appears cold. Its surface is a sheet of blue-white ice, fractured like an ancient map of paths never walked. There are no blazing volcanoes like Eos, no powerful magnetic field like Ganymede's. Only ice and long intersecting cracks, as though something deep below has been moving with great force. And it is precisely those cracks that slow the heartbeat of both science and philosophy. Beneath the ice, a global ocean may exist. Not scattered lakes, not isolated pockets of water, but a continuous ocean, tens, perhaps hundreds of kilometers deep, larger than all the oceans on Earth combined. What is strange is this: that ocean does not freeze. Not because the sun warms it, but because of tidal heating energy born of gravity. Jupiter pulls. Europa compresses. It releases it again and again, like a slow but unceasing breath. And within that rhythm, water remains liquid. Here, science touches a gentle paradox. Life may be sustained by tension, not by comfort. Heat does not come from light. It comes from pull. And that pull, if steady enough, long enough, can become a stable source of warmth. In human life, we often search for hope in bright places, success, safety, certainty. Europa exists as a quiet counterexample. It suggests that hope may lie beneath layers of ice, within dark regions we have grown accustomed to calling empty, where there is water, heat, and chemistry. Science says there is the possibility of life. But what matters more is how those elements come together. Not loudly, not visibly, not needing green surfaces or open skies. Only a closed space stable enough for small reactions to unfold over immense spans of time. Philosophy has long understood this rhythm. Albert Camus once wrote in The Myth of Sisyphus, "The struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart." Europa does not climb. It does not reach outward, yet it carries a very different kind of struggle, a silent effort to keep water liquid, to sustain motion in darkness, to avoid freezing completely in the cold of space. At night, as you listen, you may be carrying layers of ice like this within you. Protective layers formed over time, long silences, emotional regions you rarely touch. We often assume that ice means numbness. Europa reminds us that ice can also be the shell that preserves life. Not every ocean needs a sky. Not every hope needs to be seen. The cracks on Europa's surface matter deeply. They signal that the ice is not perfect, that there is exchange between above and below, that what lies deep is not entirely sealed away. In the human mind, such cracks often frighten us. We fear we are breaking. Europa offers another way of seeing cracks, maybe where hope breathes. Carl Jung once wrote in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, "In all chaos, there is a cosmos in all disorder, a secret order." Europa's ocean is such a secret order. It does not need immediate proof. It does not need to be hurried into the light. To acknowledge that it may exist is already enough to change how we understand life in the universe. When science speaks of Europa, its tone softens. No firm declarations, no final conclusions. Only words like perhaps, possibility, hope. And strangely, this uncertainty itself becomes healing. It allows imagination to breathe. It allows questions to exist without demanding answers. Europa does not promise life. It only opens a possibility. And in the night, when all demands grow quiet, perhaps that possibility is enough. You do not need to know what lives beneath the ice within you. You do not need to dig. You do not need to shine light. Only to know that there may be an ocean moving very slowly, keeping the most fragile things warm. As this thought softens, as the image of a dark, deep ocean, warmed by steady gravitational pull, fades, you may let your mind drift with it. No great hope required, no answers needed, just a very light feeling that even in darkness, life can wait, and so can you, held by silent rhythms, patient enough for sleep to arrive like a slow wave, enveloping and calm. After allowing ourselves to believe that a dark, deep, and warm ocean may exist beneath Europa's ice, the flow of thought naturally leads to a profoundly human question. If life is there, how would we look for it? Not with haste, not with the desire to conquer, but with a kind of listening refined until it becomes almost a whisper. The search for life beyond Earth does not begin with images of large beings or radiant civilizations. It begins with a subtle adjustment of expectation. After decades of imagination, science slowly learns to lower its voice. It no longer seeks signs of someone like us. It seeks only signs of life in its simplest possible form. Missions toward Europa carry no grand symbols. They bring ice-penetrating radar, gentle, invisible waves passing through the frozen shell to read the structures below. They carry ideas of robotic submersibles, not to intrude, but to observe without disturbance. And, above all, they carry a humble assumption. If life exists, it will likely be microbial, not large or complex. This matters deeply because it reflects a maturation in how humanity looks at the universe. We once dreamed of towering beings, superior intelligences, decisive answers to our sense of loneliness. But before Europa, science slows down. It no longer asks, who is living there? It asks, is anything living at all? In inner life, this is a deeply healing shift. We often seek dramatic change, a great answer, a major turning point, a clear liberation. Europa whispers something else, that life usually begins very small. A chemical reaction, a repeating cycle, a persistence without awareness. Philosophy touched this idea long ago. Ludwig Wittgenstein wrote in Philosophical Investigations. What we do is to bring words back from their metaphysical to their everyday use. The search for extraterrestrial life is doing the same, bringing the concept of life back to its most ordinary essence. No meaning required, no purpose imposed, only existing long enough to continue existing. Ice-penetrating radar does not search for shapes. It looks for conductivity reflection, minute differences in matter. These differences are quiet, yet they suggest movement, exchange, something happening very slowly, very steadily. Within the human mind, life often appears this way as well. Not always as clear joy. Sometimes it is simply that you continue to breathe, continue to listen, continue to be present even when you do not feel alive in the usual sense. A robotic submersible, if one day it reaches Europa's ocean, will not look for swimming creatures. It will search for unusual chemistry energy cycles, traces of self-organization, things easily overlooked if we rely only on loud imagination. Here, science learns humility. It does not hope to see. It hopes only to confirm that it is not mistaken. Carl Sagan once wrote in Pale Blue Dot, "Somewhere, something incredible is waiting to be known. Yet that incredible need not be dazzling. It could be a microbe unaware of light, unaware of purpose, unaware that it is being sought. And it is precisely this indifference that makes it profound. Life does not require an audience to exist." In the night, as you listen to these words, you may also be searching for some sign within yourself, a confirmation that you are still living correctly. But Europa and the missions toward it suggest another way of seeing. You do not need to be large, clear, or brilliant to be alive. You only need movement. You only need exchange. You only need a rhythm repeated long enough to endure. Seen closely, the search for life beyond Earth is not a journey outward. It is a lesson in how to look more closely, more gently, more slowly. It teaches respect for what is fragile, how not to break what we do not yet understand, how to accept that some answers do not arrive as words. And when science slows in this way, it draws very near to philosophy. The ambition to explain everything falls away. What remains is the wish to stand as a quiet observer. If you allow yourself to remain in that position a little longer, without seeking images, without demanding conclusions, you may feel a very light peace. The peace of knowing that life somewhere may be unfolding without any need for your attention. You do not need to follow it. You do not need to understand it, only to know that, like the potential microbes beneath Europa's ice, the life within you may be very small, very quiet, yet resilient enough to continue. And within that feeling, as grand expectations dissolve, sleep can arrive, not as an interruption, but as a gentle continuation of that same silent life, unfolding very slowly, very deeply, in the safe darkness of the night. After accompanying science in its search for fragile life beneath Europa's ice, The current of thought naturally shifts to an even deeper layer, the layer of matter that once died in order to become the foundation of life and technology. Here, the story is no longer about water or microbes, but about carbon and its purest form, diamond. Carbon is not born in peace. It does not emerge from moments of stability. The first carbon atoms are forged in the cores of aging red stars, then released in supernova explosions, where the death of a star is not an ending, but a dispersal. Matter is torn apart, scattered into space, drifting for millions of years, settling, combining, restructuring. Diamond, then, is the legacy of dead stars, a memory compressed. For carbon to become diamond, it must endure immense pressure, extreme heat, and sufficient time. There are no shortcuts, no haste. Atoms rearrange themselves into an almost perfect crystal lattice, each bond precise, each distance optimized. In a universe filled with chaos, diamond appears as a paradox, absolute order, born from cosmic violence. Humanity has long been drawn to this paradox. We see diamond as a symbol of beauty, of permanence, of value. Yet, before it became jewelry, diamond was already an extraordinary physical structure. It conducts heat better than any natural material. It withstands extreme pressure. It resists deformation, and for these reasons, diamond has gradually left the display case and entered laboratories, factories, and space. From a symbol of luxury, diamond became a strategic material. Ultra-precise cutting tools, heat-resistant microchips, quantum devices, high-pressure technologies. Matter born from stellar death now supports the most refined advances of human intelligence. Here, science touches a very deep question, not about market value, but about the meaning of structure. Why does a perfect crystal lattice hold such appeal? Perhaps because in inner life, humans are always searching for something that does not shatter easily. A part of us longs to be rearranged, not to become rigid, but to become steady after pressures have passed. Baruch Spinoza once wrote in Ethics, "All things excellent are as difficult as they are rare." Diamond is not rare because it is beautiful. It is rare because the conditions required for its existence are harsh. And here, the story turns back toward the human being. We often view periods of pressure injury or collapse as things to avoid. But the universe does not avoid them. It restructures through them. Diamond does not appear despite high pressure. It appears because of high pressure, maintained long enough for everything to find its most fitting position. In the night, as you listen to these words, you may also be carrying pressures that have lasted too long. Periods when you felt compressed, forced, reshaped against your will. We often ask, why did this happen? But the universe does not ask that. It asks only whether a new structure can form. Diamond does not remember the star that died to create its carbon. Yet, It carries the trace of that event in every bond. Human beings are the same. We do not need to constantly recall every event for it to have meaning. Sometimes, meaning lies in how we have been rearranged. Philosophy has long whispered about this kind of transformation. Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote in Twilight of the Idols, "What does not kill me makes me stronger, but diamond adds a deeper layer. Not everything that does not kill you makes you stronger. Only what is allowed to restructure does." In the cosmic flow, carbon may become graphite soot or gas. Diamond is not the default fate. It is a possibility that appears only when conditions are strict enough and time is patient enough. And when science views diamond as a strategic material, it inadvertently acknowledges something deeply human. We are learning to collaborate with deep structures, rather than merely admire surfaces. We no longer ask whether diamond is beautiful. We ask how much it can withstand, how it conducts energy, what it protects. Perhaps in inner life, this is also the gentler question to carry into sleep. Not who have I become, but how have I been structured? Not to judge, only to acknowledge. As this thought settles, as images of dead stars, drifting carbon atoms, and perfect crystal lattices slowly fade, you may allow your mind to rest in a quiet feeling that even what is born from ruin can become a stable foundation. You do not need to sparkle. You do not need to prove your value. Only to know that, like diamond, what has endured pressure within you may have silently found its place, deep, enduring enough to support you as sleep arrives. Light as a gentle darkness surrounding and holding you in the safe stillness of the night. After seeing diamond as a compressed memory of stars long dead, the story does not end there. It continues to drift very slowly into another moment, the moment when humans began learning how to create diamonds of their own. Not to replace the universe, but to collaborate with it on a smaller, more patient scale. Synthetic diamonds, produced through methods such as CVD, are not imitations. They do not try to mimic outward beauty. They focus instead on inner structure, on how carbon arranges itself when placed in conditions precise enough, stable enough. Pressure, temperature, time. Everything is adjusted very slowly, very evenly, like a long breath held in place. Here, science is no longer an act of extraction. It becomes a ritual of reenactment. Humans do not force matter to become valuable. They simply create the space in which matter can rediscover its most optimal form. Carbonado. Those strange diamonds that may come from space remind us that not all order is smooth. Some structures are born of mixtures of collisions of histories that are not continuous. And precisely these structures, when understood correctly, can endure conditions that perfect diamonds cannot. The future of technology is not searching for refinement alone. It is searching for endurance under extremes. Diamond conducts heat exceptionally well, dispersing energy from systems under heavy load. It can conduct electricity when shaped in the right way. It withstands pressures, radiation, and temperatures before which most materials must yield. And so, diamond appears in places far removed from jewelry, lights, in microchips, in space instruments, in extreme pressure experiments. There, beauty is no longer the priority. Stability becomes the core. This carries a very gentle philosophical tone, because in human life we often confuse sparkle with durability. We believe value must be visible, but technological diamond does not need to be admired. It only needs to continue working quietly, precisely under the harshest conditions. Martin Heidegger once wrote in The Question Concerning Technology, "The essence of technology is by no means anything technological. The technology of diamond does not reside in machines. It resides in attitude, an attitude of respecting structure, understanding limits, and being patient with time. Humans learn not to demand that matter satisfy desire immediately. They learn to create conditions and then wait. At night, as you listen, you may find yourself in a similar phase. Not a time to shine, but a time to be restructured. Not to become rigid, but to be able to conduct energy through yourself without overheating, without overload." Synthetic diamond offers a gentle metaphor. Resilience is not infinite endurance. It is the ability to guide energy correctly, to allow pressure to pass through, to be dispersed, to be transformed, rather than accumulating until it fractures the structure. In high-pressure laboratories, humans recreate conditions that nature once needed millions of years to achieve. Yet, they do not rush to conclusions. They observe, they refine, they accept failure. And then, crystal lattices emerge not because they were forced, but because the moment was right. The philosopher Simone Weil once wrote in Gravity and Grace, "Attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity. Seen through diamond, the technology of the future is precisely such a form of attention. Attention deep enough not to break what is fragile. Patience long enough for structure to complete itself. When science carries diamond into space, it does not bring merely a material. It carries a quiet belief that it is possible to build systems capable of enduring silence, radiation, and isolation. And that belief, when placed into human life, becomes a healing whisper. You do not need to react constantly. You only need a structure good enough for what arrives to pass through." If you allow yourself to remain with this thought a little longer, imagining crystal lattices conducting energy smoothly in the darkness of a laboratory or deep space, you may feel a very real peace. Not because pressure has vanished, but because pressure has found its path. And as the stream of thought slows, as the future of technology grows quieter, you may let your mind rest. No need to predict, no need to optimize, only to trust that, like the diamonds of the universe and the diamonds made by human hands, the most enduring structures are often formed in silence, through attention and through time. Within that feeling, sleep can arrive not as a stopping point, but as a very gentle cycle of restructuring, where all energy is guided along its proper paths, and you are allowed to rest inside your own quiet resilience. After completing a long distant arc from Jupiter's self-generated storms through hidden oceans, through diamonds born of dead stars, and diamonds shaped by technology, the current slows. Not because there is nothing left to say, but because the moment has arrived when nothing more needs to be said. Here, the story naturally returns to a place very near the final question of life. Venus appears like a tilted mirror, not far from Earth, not small, not unfamiliar. Once Venus may have resembled Earth. It may have held water, a dense atmosphere, the ability to retain heat. But then, a sequence of small deviations never corrected in time pushed the planet onto a different path. The greenhouse effect slipped beyond control. Temperatures rose, oceans evaporated. The surface became a world that crushes every familiar structure. Venus is not hell because it is ugly. It is hell because it once had the potential to become a paradise. In the language of modern science, Venus is sometimes called a failed Earth, not as mockery, but as a reminder. Life is not guaranteed, simply because initial conditions appear right. Complex systems require continuous balance. And when that balance drifts too far, returning is no longer simple. Yet, Venus's story does not end at its scorched surface. Within its acidic clouds, where pressure and temperature soften. Science encounters another strange possibility. Life may exist in the clouds, not plants, not animals. Perhaps only microorganisms floating, adapting, needing no ground to stand on. This idea is light and very deep. It suggests that life does not cling to a single form. When ground becomes uninhabitable, it may leave the ground. When surfaces grow too hostile, it may choose the space between sky and world, not to conquer, only to continue. From Jupiter to Venus, we see two ends of a wide spectrum. Jupiter, where life may hide deep, protected by gravity and time. Venus, where life, if it exists, must drift within unstable conditions. One embodies long-term shelter, the other, fragile adaptation. And between these poles, a question slowly emerges. Does the universe possess a design for life? Or is life merely a phenomenon that appears when conditions temporarily allow and disappears when those conditions change? Stephen Hawking once wrote in A Brief History of Time, "The universe doesn't allow perfection, not as pessimism, but as a liberating truth. The universe is not built to protect life. It does not promise stability. It offers only intervals, windows in which structures are durable enough to persist." In this view, life is not a purpose. It is a way matter experiences itself for a brief moment in cosmic time. Stephen Hawking's greatest legacy does not lie in equations. It lies in attitude, the courage to look directly at finitude without turning away. to say that the universe does not require meaning in order to exist, and that humanity in its fragility does not need to be centered to have value. In the night, as you listen this far, a familiar question may quietly arise: if everything is temporary, if even planets can fail, what remains? The answer does not arrive as a statement. It arrives as a feeling that existence, even brief, is still rare. That the ability to ask questions, even without answers, is still a profound form of participation in the universe. And that you do not need to be perfect, durable, or aligned with any design to be allowed to rest. Jupiter does not know it protects hidden oceans. Venus does not know it is a warning. The universe does not know it is being observed. And within this unknowing, a kind of peace appears. No obligation to understand, no responsibility to conclude, no need to find the final answer before closing your eyes. Stephen Hawking once said in The Universe in a Nutshell, "Remember to look up at the stars and not down at your feet." But perhaps now, you no longer need to look up. You have traveled far enough. You have seen widely enough. Now you may turn toward the quiet within, where there is no Jupiter or Venus, no life or destruction, only a slow, even breath, supported by the same laws that gave birth to the stars. The universe does not need you to understand it. It only needs you to be here for a while, and then to rest. And as the final question dissolves unanswered, yet no longer tense, you may allow sleep to arrive, not as an ending, but as a merging, gentle deep into the same current that carried carbon from dead stars, water into dark oceans, and human awareness into this moment of calm. Here, you need nothing more. Just let the universe continue in your place.